what can only be described as an unbelievably keen intellect and a knowledge of so many things that it absolutely boggles my mind. It is a pleasure to be able to share the Bima this morning with our Darshan, with Jerome Vered.
I guess. I now have 10 minutes to babble, so let's go. Okay. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Now, last week, I don't know if Sandy Samuels is here, but he spoke about forefathers and foremothers, and from the sound in Russell Hall, sounded like he was talking about forebears. And I don't know what the forebears were in his Torah portion, and I was looking, maybe I had bears in mine. But no, I couldn't find forebears, I couldn't find three bears, but I did find bulls, lots of bulls. I'm going to talk about three bulls, three very different kinds of bulls, three different heads of cattle, bulls and calves that are related to what we read today and to this season. So first, I want to talk about the structure of this week's reading, what we read and what we're skipping. Our reading is the same as the week for Chol HaMoed Pesach, and it comes from Parshat Kitisa. And our reading starts with God telling Moshe Rabbeinu to carve new tablets and climb back up the mountain. There's the theophany, the revelation, where Moshe sees the traces of God, and the 13 attributes are revealed. Then there are the commandments that are going to keep Israel separate from the nations inhabiting Canaan. We're not supposed to make treaties with them. We are commanded to smash their idols. We are commanded not to intermarry with them. We are commanded not to worship with these people, not to cast metal idols, to keep the 3 regalim, the harvest festivals, to redeem the Bechor, the firstborn, to observe Shabbat, to bring the offerings of the Rayon and the Bikurim, the first fruits. And biblically, we're commanded not to cook a kid in its mother's milk, and from the oral tradition, not to mix milk and meat. And that's the crux, the foundation of the reading. And when we read parts of this section again on Tisha B'Av and on fast days, we read parts of the same section. We read the verses where Moshe intercedes with God to keep him from destroying Israel, a little bit more direct than we read today. And we read the section from the command to carve the tablets up to the revelation of the attributes. But there's a big elephant in the room. And that's the section we aren't reading. It was Rabbi referred to it a little bit earlier. We're skipping around that section. And that's the episode of the golden calf and its aftermath. And that's the first bull I want to talk about today. Now, we often, let's say, I used to think, when thinking about the significance of the calf, that somehow this was a foreign idol. This was an Egyptian god that the faithless, and in many ways, I think, maligned Dor HaMidbar, the generation of the desert, they turned to. But when we look a little more closely, we see that they were asking Aaron for something tangible, as they didn't know what had happened to Moses. Immediately, after they ask, Aaron asks them for their gold, and they give it to him immediately. He makes the calf, and he pronounces, Ele Elohecha Yisrael asher he'elucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. And I'll translate, behold, these are your God, O Israel, who raised you up out of the land of Mitzrayim. So they aren't worshiping a foreign God. They're using foreign means to worship the true God who brought them out of Egypt, who, according to Yehuda Levi, this is the God that functions throughout history. This is the history that they saw. The intention of the people is to worship God, is to worship them in ways that were familiar to people who had lived in Egypt, with a symbol that represented and embodied the divine. But, intentions aren't everything. The consequences were dire, nearly resulting with the destruction of the people of Israel, if not for Moshe's intercession. And the figure of cattle, of yearling bulls, becomes expanded through this. Usually bulls are brought as part of the sacrificial list that we have on the holidays. We read some today. And usually as Korban Olah, the burnt sacrifice, which is a type commonly seen in the festival lists that we read in the Maftir on holidays. And usually, on all of these holidays, in Rosh Chodesh, the Chatat, the sin offering that's brought, is a goat. On Yom Kippur, the Chatat is different. That was just, a few weeks ago. The allegory, the remez, is that the reason a goat is usually brought as the standard sin offering is because the goat symbolizes the blood of the goat that Joseph's brothers put on his coat when they kidnapped their brother and sold him into slavery. They marked the coat to tell their father Jacob that Joseph had been killed. So this goat alludes to the sin of all of Israel. And this sin has been with us pretty much since the beginning. But now we're getting to the second bull that I want to talk about. On Yom Kippur, this is also in the Avodah service that we read, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, makes a confession of sins for Israel on the goat. I'm sorry, the confession he makes for Israel is on a goat. But what animal does he use to confess the sins of his family and of the Kohanim? He uses a bull. And according to these commentators, the reason he uses the bull is that this is an allegory for the egel, for the golden calf, through which Aaron led the people to make a great sin. So next year on Yom Kippur, when we're doing the Torah reading or the Adat section, look and remember this is why Aaron is putting his hands on a bull when he's making his vidui, his confession. But usually, the bulls that are brought for the festivals are a mark of great joy. The bulls are the most expensive sacrifices compared to the yearling lambs and rams, and this will lead us to the third bull that I'm going to talk about. Now, in the commentaries for the Sukkot sacrifices, they like to point out that there are 70 bulls brought over the course of a week. These are brought for the sake of the entire nation, and I promise that if you go to any abattoir in this country, you're going to see more than 70 bulls slaughtered on any given day, let alone a week. But now for a bit of math. Math is going to be part of this. The first day, the bulls are brought, there's 13, and this decreases until there is 70. And this is the medieval aside. Our translation in the Chumash that we use loses this difference. But on the first, second, and fourth days, and what we read in Parshat Pinchas, the text says, Sir izim achad lechatat. A male goat, one male goat, let's say of the flock, is brought for a sin offering. And on the other days, seir lachatat, a male goat for the offering, without the word izim. So the commentators are explaining that when there's a seir alone, this refers to Esau, Jacob's brother, who lives on Mount Seir, and is also known as Edom. And Edom in rabbinic literature refers to Rome, and in fact to all the Christian nations. And Seir izim is an allusion to Ishmael, who's traditionally seen as a herder, and Ishmael represents the Muslim nations. So on days 1, 2, and 4, we have 13, 12, and 10. We have 35 bulls for the Christian nations, and the rest, the other 35, we have for the Christian nations. All right? Yes, that's right. Making up the 70 nations of the earth according to the tradition. And the Sukkot offerings have 2 rams instead of 1, and 14 yearling lambs instead of the 7. It's a huge number of animals that are brought. So now, in comparison to this meat fest, usually on Rosh Chodesh and on Pesach, the normal amount of animals brought for the Olah is 10. 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 sheep. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's only 9. There's 1 bull, 1 ram, and 1 sheep. Now, it's usually explained that the missing bull, this lack is explained as mirroring our lack on these days, as this is a penitential day. These are days we're talking and we're beseeching Hashem for forgiveness. So we're not coming full, we come a little bit lacking, asking for something. And there's one more day, though, where there's the same number of 9 animals that are brought. And that day is coming up. That day is Monday, it's Shmini Atzeret. And because the sacrifices are similar on Shmini Atzeret and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the tradition is that Shmini Atzeret is also a penitential day. The books are written on Yom Kippur, they're sealed, books are written on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur they're sealed, and on Hoshana Rabbah they're finally put away, which is why Hoshana Rabbah is the last full day for tshuva, and it's a very complicated ritual. The next day is Shmini Atzeret, a day for stopping living in Sukkah, and an end to our fall cycle of holidays where we are judged, and where on Sukkot the world is judged for rain. But I think there's a nicer midrash on this single bull that's being brought up on Shmini Atzeret, and that's the one I want to share with you, partly because when I mentioned it some time ago to Rabbi Silver, she seemed to like it. So, Sukkot is a party for the whole world, as envisioned by Zechariah, whose future vision of Sukkot we read on the first day of the holiday. And here we are throwing a big, great party. And scholars have been juggling fire for Simchat Beit HaShoava, and there have been feasts around the city, and the harvest is coming in. And we've gone through 70 bulls for the sake of the entire world. And now it's Shmini Atzeret. It's just us, Israel, alone with Hashem. And it's like party's over. God says to us, you know what? The guests have gone. Kick off your shoes, just you and me. And instead of all these hordes of sacrifices, let's just share a sandwich. Let's just share a little something. One bull that we, Hashem and Israel, are going to share intimately, privately, now that all our guests have gone home. And this last shared bull is the third bull that I wanted to talk to you about. And that's it. So I leave the jokes about bull to those of you who are so inclined to make them. And Shabbat Shalom. It's time for Musaf.